Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all having a good day and that you're in good spirits and that you are healthy. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This is the first of a series of webinars on the Alaskan and Yukon rivers. This webinar will focus on an introduction to the project and also a discussion about the Native Advisory Council application process. And I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Colleen Cooley, and I am a research specialist with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, Tribes and Climate Change team. And this project and also this series of webinars is hosted by ITEP in collaboration with the University of Colorado Boulder, and also in collaboration with a number of other entities, including USGS, University of Waterloo, the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council, INCAR, and University of, not sure how to say it. But anyways, thank you for joining us today. So before we get started, I want to mention a few things. All the participants and attendees should be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you happen to have a question, if you're having issues with audio, you can feel free to insert your question or concern in the questions box, which should be located within your control panel on the right-hand side. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our website next week. So I just wanted to start off with a little bit of information on our ITEP's Tribes and Climate Change team. So on the phone, we have Karen Cazzetto, who is the co-manager, and possibly Nikki Cooley as well, who is also a co-manager. We also have Kelsey Morales, who is our senior program coordinator, Dara Marks Marina, who is our research specialist. And I also would like to acknowledge Laureen Lewis, who is our administrative assistant, and Amanda Kapp as well. So I wanted to start off again with ITEP's mission. And ITEP strengthens tribal capacity and sovereignty in environmental and natural resource management through culturally relevant education, research, partnerships, and policy-based services. And ITEP's Tribes and Climate Change team was established in 2009, and it was established to provide support and be responsive to the needs of tribes that are preparing for and currently contending with climate change impacts. Our program provides technical assistance, trainings, informational resources, and tools for tribes that are working on or are interested in developing climate change adaptation plans and or climate vulnerability assessments. So some of these resources and trainings include our webinars, which we are hosting today, and also our monthly newsletters. So for any webinar topics, we are right now mostly working online and virtually. So if you have any suggestions for future webinar topics, please feel free to contact us. You can find our contact information at our website by searching ITEP Tribes and Climate Change Team or following the link that's on this slide. So the purpose and title of this project is Navigating the New Arctic: the sensitivity of Alaskan and Yukon rivers, fish, and communities to climate. So with an overall goal to integrate Indigenous knowledges and Western science to improve our understanding of how Arctic rivers, fish, and Indigenous communities might be impacted by and adapt to climate change. So this project began in January of this year, and it goes through December 2024. And this is a project that is funded by the National Science Foundation's Navigating the New Arctic program. And so I would like to introduce our guest speakers for today, who will be giving more information about the project and the advisory council as well. So we have Karen Cazzetto, as I mentioned earlier, she's our co-manager with the Tribes and Climate Change Program team, and she's going to be talking about the Native Advisory Council. We have Keith Musselman, who is the principal investigator for this project, and he is affiliated with the University of Colorado Boulder, and he will be providing a project overview. And we also have Nicole Herman Mercer, and she is co-PI, and she is with the USGS, and she'll be speaking about ways to engage in the project. And so with that, I will turn it over to Keith. Let me just change the presenter to him. Okay.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for your attention. Thanks for attending this first webinar. We have a number of ideas for future webinar series, and so we're looking for feedback, particularly. And I want to take this time to start by introducing our project. Just a second while I get this queued up. Okay, so as Colleen mentioned, this is a National Science Foundation funded project under the new program called Navigating the New Arctic, which some of you may be aware of. The title is The Sensitivity of Alaskan and Yukon Rivers, Fish, and Communities to Climate. My name is Keith Musselman. I'm the project principal investigator. I'm at the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research, or INSTAR, at the University of Colorado. And a little bit about me, I grew up far from Alaska, but I grew up in a fishing city, a small city in New Hampshire. And I grew up navigating and fishing this large tidal river. A lot of our community members in the area and family members did the same. And so I kind of have this strong tie and appreciation for kind of the livelihood and the support that a river can provide, as well as the navigation. And later, when I started my own family, we lived for a while in Alberta, Canada, where we were affected by a flood in 2013. It was ended up being one of Canada's most costly floods. And this is a picture of our apartment complex where we were living at the time that got affected by this flood. So not only do I have an appreciation for the livelihood that can be supported by rivers, but also the cost of large floods and impacts on particularly on the changing climate and changing flood regimes as these rivers start to change. And so my background, my expertise is hydrology. I'm a hydrologist or a water scientist. And so I come to this project with a little bit of personal but also professional background in river science. So as Colleen mentioned, we're introducing this new 5-year research project. And really, we're seeking community involvement to guide our science. And so the couple of talks in today's webinars is first me introducing the project. I'm going to talk about ways in which we could monitor and model the climate, the rivers, and the fish. And thinking about this as a holistic system, they're all related. And then that's going to be followed by Nicole Herman Mercer with the USGS, who is a social scientist. And she's going to be talking about ways in which to engage with this project. And then finally, Karen Cazzetto at ITEP is going to be talking about what we're calling the Native Advisory Council. So we're looking for a framework to bring Indigenous representatives and leaders to the table to help guide this science that is funded by the National Science Foundation to provide actionable both information but also results. So the problem identification, the process that we undertook was it was winter of 2019. We approached the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council. If anyone is not aware of that group, it's a nonprofit representing 74 tribes and First Nations both in Alaska and Western Canada. And they're dedicated to the preservation and the protection of the Yukon River watershed. So they helped us to develop our initial research questions that I'm going to go through here. And they themselves, their research and their work is really guided by in twofold. One is an executive board of directors, and the second is a tribal and First Nations group of representatives that meet biannually. So it was with this guidance that we created some of the research questions that I'll talk about now. We were kind of guided towards a couple of questions related to fish habitat as well as river ice transportation. So as the Arctic continues to warm and change, we're wondering how and questioning how fish habitat and river ice will be impacted by changes in climate, air temperature, precipitation, but also changes in the landscape and permafrost. And then as that relates to changes in groundwater. So as permafrost starts to thaw, groundwater avenues open up and water is moving in new ways through the subsurface. And that changes the chemistry of the water, also changes the temperature of the water in these large rivers. And so you can see how all of this is kind of related, and to get at these questions, we then kind of pulled these bullet points that the Watershed Council kind of informed. We pulled this into a science question, and we pitched this to the NSF in a formal proposal. And we structured our project team to have as diverse experience as possible in water quality monitoring, river ice prediction, stream flow, climate change, fish, and as well as tribal environmental issues. It was agreed upon that all of these were important components of the project to address. And so no one team member has an expertise, no one scientist in the world can address all of these questions. It's really a mouthful. But together, we think, particularly with guidance from a council or a Native Advisory Council, we could make some progress here. So the project team consists of, as Colleen mentioned, the University of Colorado, with myself, Mike Gusev, Cassandra Brooks, Noah Malich, Saber Duran, the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, with Nicole Herman Mercer, Josh Cook, Ryan Toohey, Mike Carey, and the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council with Etta Mutter. I should mention a number of these people are on the call today and will serve as panelists at the end and for the question and answer period. The National Center for Atmospheric Research, located here in Boulder, does work on climate research, and that's led by Andy Newman, Joe Hammond, Tony Craig. The Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, Karen Cazzetto, Anne Marie Chichili, Nikki Cooley, the University of Saskatchewan, Carl Eric Lindenschmidt, and the University of Waterloo with Heidi Swanson. We proposed to, because we're focused on changes in the landscape, particularly as it relates to permafrost, we focused our study region on the Yukon River watershed and north to the Arctic Sea. So this area in white indicates that our kind of domain, our study domain, with the caveat that we're going to be looking at climate simulations, so simulations of future climate and water over all of Alaska and all of Western Canada, so a much larger region. And I don't need to explain much about the Yukon River watershed to this group, I'm sure, but this is to communicate to those in the lower 48 how large, the large expanse of the Yukon watershed, and particularly in comparison to what data is available to understand the environmental processes and the fish biology, for example, of this region. If you look at the sparse northern USGS river gauge network up in Alaska compared to the lower 48, you can see that this is a large region that is very data sparse. So I mentioned the Native Advisory Council. It's really important to us, and it's important to ITEP to form this advisory panel of Indigenous representatives to, on one side, ensure equitable co-production of knowledge, but also to ensure that Indigenous perspectives are included throughout the entire project, and that are valued on an equal basis with the Western science that I'm presenting today. And so how can we come together to help develop co-production guidelines for the project? What's important? And I know that a lot of these are buzzwords, particularly today, but I truly do think that we're kind of pushing in a direction that is very much needed to bring Western scientists and Indigenous leaders and and representatives to the table to say, you know, how can we best address these issues of the changing ecosystem, changing climate, and these impacts on people. I'm very much a visual thinker, and so I kind of lay out the project in this Venn diagram, where there are all these overlapping ovals, and there's each of these ovals is a component, and you can see that the largest overlap there is with communities. And so I think that is very central to the project for a number of reasons, but mostly to ensure meaningful outcomes and results of our project. We want to engage communities to co-produce knowledge of river conditions and identify climate vulnerabilities. And as a project team, we follow both the principles for conducting research in the Arctic and guidelines for considering traditional knowledges and climate change initiatives led by Carlotta Chief. And so I'll let Nicole speak a little bit more about the details, but we want to integrate Indigenous knowledge with Western science and to co-identify these vulnerabilities of fish and of river ice, and particularly river ice transportation. And we would do so through semi-structured interviews with community members, participatory mapping of regions of interest where scientists could provide a little bit more focus and for example, future projections, as well as computer modeling. So that's the Western science coming together with the participatory mapping and the interviews to kind of weave this story of where we are currently and where we're headed. As part of that, observations are critical, and this project will be providing new automated river instrumentation to enhance both the USGS gauge network, which is sparse, but also importantly, to advance and support the Indigenous Observation Network, ION, which is a community-based water quality monitoring project that's facilitated by both the USGS and the Watershed Council. And so those sensors, these automated sensors, may be available to interested communities. We have on the order of 40 of these automated sensors that could go out to large rivers in Alaska, for example. And they're called specific conductance, but it's a water quality measurement. And it also takes the temperature and it records it in an automated fashion. It's put in after the ice breakup and pulled out before the ice sets in. And so the next component there is our climate and river modeling. So we propose to do high resolution, which just says, if you can imagine a pixelated image of a region. We're saying resolve this at the highest resolution that we feel comfortable doing, and that, in this case, it's about 4-kilometer resolution. And so we're trying to resolve the historical weather, say, for example, hourly at every 4-kilometer box covering this domain, and also for future weather conditions and climate projections. And so we need a little bit of guidance in terms of how best to represent the future climate. What time periods are of interest? Is it mid-century? Is it end of century? Is it nearer term or longer term? And so all that modeling includes things like permafrost, snow cover, stream flow, river water temperature, as well as river ice simulations. And so we seek guidance on what information is most useful to communities. A little bit of detail about the modeling chain that we've proposed to use. The model itself is one that was developed for running in the Arctic. It's called the Regional Arctic System Model, or RASM. And the hydrologic and land surface model that we're talking about using is a new community model at NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research. We're going to couple those two and run it at high resolution. This is the model domain, or the area where we'll be producing weather and climate data, both for historical and future climates. And then you take the output from that model and you have the stream flow. And so that water then gets routed to the rivers. You can see in this animation, you can see that climate model output is feeding these large rivers that expand to the north, for example, as the ice melts out and the river flows respond. We're going to, at the same time, use that river flow and river temperature data to model river ice, as I mentioned. And we think that if we get these things, these physical processes in line, then we are closer to being able to understand potentially the future of fish, and particularly their habitat and what fish biologists might call bioenergetics, or their life cycle. So we could use river temperature and flow together with biological information to model fish. So that's the next component here, is water temperature is the main factor regulating fish. And so we'd ask, what species are of interest? What river run species are of interest? And what river reaches are of interest? And then finally, we're quite excited as a team about this idea of storylines. And so rather than asking what will happen, which we can't answer with confidence in terms of the future climate and the future of fish and the future of rivers, this concept of storylines allows us to ask what might be the effect of different policy or adaptation measures across a whole range of future climates. And we'd say that these are probably more relevant to society than a common probabilistic approach, which is to say there's a 30% likelihood of something happening. That might mean something to an engineer, but it may not mean much to the rest of us. So we seek storytellers who could help us to weave indigenous narratives with these narratives that are coming out of the climate models about what could happen in the future, what the future could look like. And I think we think storylines are quite a compelling way to communicate that. And then finally, as part of this project, we would like to bring together a gathering of tribal and First Nation resource managers, of community members, of academic, federal, state, and provincial researchers to discuss issues related to Arctic rivers, related to the rivers themselves, the fish, and the communities who are dependent and support their livelihoods from. And as part of that, we have resources available to support 42 scholarships to members of Alaskan villages and First Nation communities to attend this summit planned for the winter of 2022. So we seek guidance on possible discussion topics, on activities, and also to guide scholarship recipients. With that, I'm going to pause for any questions and hand it on back to Colleen. So thanks for your attention today.
Great, thank you, Keith. Right now, we do not have any questions, so maybe we can pass it on to Nicole.
Okay.
Oh, actually, there was one question that came in. Keith, do you want to answer it? There's one question from Amber Nashoba, and she is asking, the Indigenous consultation aspect is good. What actions have you done to collaborate with and include other Indigenous scientists?
That's a great question. So I wonder if Karen could speak a little bit about that. Reaching out to Indigenous scientists is a great suggestion and something we'd be very open to. Karen, have you had a chance to think about that?
Hi, thanks Keith, and thanks so much Amber for that question. Yeah, so the initial part of the project was done in consultation with the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council, and we definitely recognize that there are a lot of other communities and Indigenous organizations in the region that we're working in. And so what we're hoping to do now, and what we've started to do, is to reach out to these communities and Indigenous organizations, and we would really welcome input from communities, and we'd also welcome people on the call. If you could spread the word and let people know about this project, so that kind of the idea is to get as much broad community input as possible. And then I'll be talking later. We'll also be getting input from the Native Advisory Council. And one of the things that we'd like them to do is to help us evaluate broader community input and also help us figure out what are the best ways to reach out to other Indigenous scientists, Indigenous organizations, and community members. So thanks so much for that question.
She also mentioned, in all honesty, I am an Indigenous scientist looking for work and living in Anchorage. Yep. And yeah, and then we have one comment from MAK Muir, great presentation. So with that, I think we will go ahead and turn it over to Nicole.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. Let's see if I can get everything turned on.
Yes, looks great. Just need to start your slideshow.
All right, how's that?
Looks good.
Okay, great. All right, well, thanks again. Yes, my name is Nicole Herman Mercer, and I'm a research social scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey's Water Resources Mission Area. I'm also, as was mentioned, a co-PI on this project, which I'm really excited about being involved in. So I'm going to spend a few minutes. This is actually great that Amber just asked that question, because I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about all of the ways that we're hoping for folks to become involved in the project and the opportunities we're going to try to provide for engagement along the way. So first, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about myself. So I was born and raised, and I'm still lucky enough to live in the Denver metro area in Colorado. I've been married to my high school sweetheart for 15 years now, and we have 2 amazing children that I have gotten to spend a ton of time with lately, as the 3 of us try to navigate everybody working and going to school at home. So that's been fun. And I've been fortunate enough to be working in Indigenous communities in Alaska, primarily in the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta region of Western Alaska for the past 11 years with the USGS. So I wanted to come back to this, this diagram that Keith put together and frame this discussion in the context of the larger project, as Keith just described it. There are opportunities to participate in nearly every aspect of this project. And a major objective of this project is to be as participatory as possible. And that means that we would like community members, members of Indigenous organizations, tribal councils, First Nation governments, students, and anyone who's really interested to be involved in all aspects of the project at the level that's comfortable for them. So the full title of this project is The Climate Impacts on Alaskan and Yukon Rivers, Fish and Communities as Told Through Co-Produced Scenarios. And I'm not going to discuss all of the details of how we're seeking to co-produce scenarios with communities in this storyline context that surrounds the whole project, partly because we're going to focus on that for another webinar, and also because some of that is going to be guided by the Native Advisory Council. And so, and Karen's going to talk in detail about the Native Advisory Council in a few minutes. But the reason that I bring up co-production is because I just want to point out that it's sort of the pinnacle of this ladder of engagement that we're seeking to have in our project. So at the bottom of that ladder is just communication, a one-way process where data and information from our project can be made available to all interested parties outside of the project. Consultation would be the next step up on the ladder, where we're getting more to like a two-way communication between people outside of the project and that are project team members, where we're gathering comments and perception, information, and experiences from stakeholders to help guide and improve the project. The next step would be participation, which is just what it sounds like, you know, opportunities to take part in some of the project processes. Partnerships is moving more towards a collaborative situation, and we're hoping that we can partner with other Indigenous organizations along the way and work together towards the project's goals. And then finally, co-production is really characterized by a balanced share of power, where the project's goals, methods, and the knowledge created by the project are all produced together. And so our project really encompasses opportunities on each step of this ladder that I want to talk about now. So the various ways that individuals and communities can engage in our project, we're hoping to get feedback on these various research design and deliverables that we're seeking. So we want to understand feedback, both to make sure that our project and the way that we conduct our project and the results of our project are appropriate and meaningful to the communities primarily in our study area, but also beyond. We're really hoping to be kind of an example of how a project like this can take place. So to do this, we're really seeking information, like Keith mentioned, about what kind of future climate scenarios your community would like to consider so that we can help and make sure that we're producing the most meaningful and valuable scenarios through our modeling. We also want to know what river and river habitats are most important for your community or for the fish that live in that river that you might be dependent on. The river ice corridors that are critical for your community to get around, to visit family and friends, and participate in other subsistence activities in the winter, and which fish are most important to you and your community, so we can ensure that the fish that we are seeking to model are the appropriate ones to get information about. And we also really want to know what this project can help all of us learn to increase your community's resilience to climate change, both now and moving into the future. So the easiest way to stay informed about our project is to join our email listserv. This is the way that we are going to be communicating project updates, announcing upcoming webinars, and engagement opportunities. From time to time, we may also send out requests for feedback on our project goals and tasks through this listserv. And it's a great way to stay informed about the project, particularly if you don't necessarily want to participate in the project in other ways, but you're interested in knowing what's going on. So to do that, all you have to do is send us an email at arcticrivers@colorado.edu. And we'll make sure that that email address is up again at the end for folks, so you can write that down or send us an email. So another way that we will be providing information about the project is through our engagement webinars. So this is the first in a series of webinars that we're going to, that ITEP is going to host for this project throughout the course of the project's life cycle. So the webinars will be similar to the one that we're hosting today, where there will be an opportunity to hear from the project investigators about some of the results that we're getting as the project moves along. And also we hope an opportunity for Indigenous knowledge holders to present their perspectives on the project as well. We also hope that these calls, these engagement webinars, will be a forum for discussion. So while today we're sort of at the bottom rung of communication and pushing information out to all of you, we're hoping that we're going to move up and be getting more information back from communities and interested stakeholders throughout this process with the webinars. We may also use this forum to do polls or surveys to collect information ahead of the webinars that we can discuss as a group. And then a really important way that individuals can participate in this project is by joining the Indigenous Observation Network. As Keith mentioned, the Indigenous Observation Network is a collaborative water quality monitoring project that is co-managed by the USGS and the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council. And we're always looking for community members that are interested in joining and collecting samples for us. The way that this works is that community members that live along the Yukon River or the major tributaries of the Yukon River, both in Western Canada and in Alaska, currently collect water samples monthly in their community and ship those to the Watershed Council offices, where they're then analyzed at the University of Alaska Fairbanks Laboratory, and then we share data back with communities. So you can participate in the Indigenous Observation Network by collecting water samples that will help inform sort of both projects, the ION project as well as this project. Or you can volunteer to help install and maintain a temperature conductivity sensor that we provide. It's really important that we have some community help with this. As all of you that live out there in the Yukon River Basin and interior Alaska know, it's not always an easy place to get to. And so we are going to be relying on community help to get these sensors installed when the ice goes out and pulled back out before the ice comes in, and help maintain them over the season. And I don't think we'll be able to do that unless we have some community help. So if you're interested, this is another really great way that you can participate in the project. And then another way to learn more about the project as it progresses and project results, and as well as to provide feedback, is to meet up with us at a conference. So we don't really know what conferences are going to look like moving forward, but some of them may be virtual, some of them still may be in person with smaller attendance. But several of us on the project are planning to attend the following conferences over the next 12 months or so. And so we would encourage you to attend our presentations if you're able to attend any of these conferences. Some of us will be at the National Tribal and Indigenous Climate Conference that's hosted by ITEP that's coming up at the end of the summer. Some of us will be at the Alaska Tribal Conference on Environmental Management in Anchorage in the fall, at the Alaska Forum on the Environment coming up in the winter of 2021. Many of us, I'm sure, will be at the American Geophysical Union. So if you're there, come check out one of our presentations. And then we'll also be presenting progress on the project to the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council's biennial summit meeting that happens every other year. That'll be in 2021. I also want to talk a little bit about the Arctic River Summit that we'll be hosting in year 3 of this project. Keith touched on this a little bit in his presentation, but just to reiterate, the goals of the summit are really to bring together tribal and First Nation resource managers, knowledge holders, Arctic and boreal community members, Indigenous academic, federal, state, provincial researchers, and land managers. We kind of want everybody that has a stake in Arctic rivers and climate change in this region. The exact discussions and activities of the summit are really going to be developed by the Native Advisory Council, but we think that some potential activities are likely to include, discussions of the current state of knowledge on Arctic rivers. What kinds of things do we know and what kinds of things do we not know and need to find more information out about? Identification of important areas of concern with respect to Indigenous livelihoods. So potentially participatory mapping breakout sessions where folks can tell us exactly what regions of fish habitat we should be looking at to conduct our science, as well as the identification of key data and research gaps and brainstorming and exchanging information and solutions for increasing resiliency. So we think those will be some of the areas of focus, but as I said, it's really going to be guided by the Native Advisory Council and how they think the Arctic River Summit should happen. And then also we'll be providing travel scholarships, as Keith mentioned, for community members from across our study area to participate in the summit. We think it's really important that we have some broad participation from the communities. And finally, we'll be producing a summit white paper that all of the attendees of the Arctic River Summit will be authors on. And then also taking place in year 3 of the project will be the opportunity to apply for an Indigenous student summer internship. So these summer interns will be either recent high school graduates or early in their college career, and will be hosted either by the USGS or by the Yukon River, Intertribal Watershed Council. And these students will really help with the ethnographic methods that Keith was talking about, the semi-structured interviews that we want to do. We're seeking students from within the study region to help design the research methods and the questions that are going to be asked, and then actually go back to their communities or communities in the region to conduct interviews and document some narrative accounts of climate change, observations from their communities, and adaptations that folks are putting into place in their home communities. And for those who really want to directly impact the research process and the design of the Arctic River Summit, please consider applying to be on our Native Advisory Council. I'm not going to talk a lot about this right now, as it's going to be the focus of Karen's talk coming up next. So I'll just say that there is going to be an open application process, and that working with the Native Advisory Council is really one of the main ways in which this process of knowledge co-production will be developed for this project. And with that, I can take some questions if there are some now, or I can pass it on to Karen.
All right, thank you for that, Nicole. We don't have any new questions, but we had one from Julie Brigman, and I think after Keith's presentation. Did you have a phase 2 planning grant before the phase 1 NNA award?
So I can answer that if you want. We did not have a planning grant. We did the planning, writing the grant for NNA. And I don't know, Keith, if you want to speak any more about that. He was instrumental in bringing us all together.
Yeah, no, we did not apply for either the first time, which was I think 2016 or 2017 or 2018, but we did spend about 2.5 months kind of pulling this together and relying heavily on the team that already existed and the collaboration between the USGS and the Intertribal Watershed Council.
Great. We have a question from Serena Fitka. How was the NAC compensated for their time?
And hi, Serena, this is Karen. And actually, we'll be going over that during this presentation. So stay tuned and we will answer your question. Thank you for that question.
Great. And I think with that, we will turn it over to Karen Cozzetto.
Okay, thank you, Colleen, and thanks, Keith and Nicole, for your presentations. And my part of the presentation is to talk about the Native Advisory Council that we would like to form to help guide the project and make sure that Indigenous perspectives are included throughout this 5-year period that we're working on this. And let's see here. So a little bit about me. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and then I moved to Colorado about 17 years ago to go to graduate school. And while I was at graduate school, I studied glacial meltwater streams in the dry valleys of Antarctica with a couple of people on the project team. And while I was doing that, I became really interested in how large-scale climate features affect stream flows. And that led me to start looking into climate change projections. And I worked on a project looking at climate change projections in the Southwest. And through that work, I made connections with different tribes and also with ITEP because tribes were interested in how climate change was going to affect conditions in their areas. And I'm really grateful to be at ITEP now and appreciate we have a wonderful team both in our program and throughout the Institute. And in addition to enjoying a lot of the outdoor activities that Colorado has to offer, one thing that I really love is I play in a Brazilian percussion group, and these are some members of our group here. And I did not grow up really being musically inclined, and so it's been a lot of fun. And you can see all these different drums that people play and they're different kinds of rhythms. And I'm not the best drummer, but I can play an instrument called the agogo, which is very similar to a cowbell. So I play cowbell with our Brazilian percussion group. So some basics about the council. We're hoping to form a council with 11 members. And because the project is so long, we decided to divide the terms for the council into 2 different terms. And the first term is for 2 years from July 2020 to July 2022, with the possibility of continuing if people desire. So this application process is going to be opening, and we'll be sending out links to the application form and an information fact sheet today. And then the applications will be due June 24th, and then we hope to have our first meeting in this July. And we would like to invite people on the call, or if you know other people who might be interested. We're particularly interested in having members of Alaska Native tribes and Yukon First Nations and or staff of organizations representing Alaska Native tribes and Yukon First Nations apply to be on the council. So we hope that the council will help us with a number of different activities. As Keith mentioned during his presentation, one of the key roles of the council is to make sure that we're engaging in an equitable co-production of knowledge. And this has different meanings to different people. So we hope that the council will help us come up with some guidelines and, what specifically does it mean in the context of this project? Something that it can mean is we have all these different aspects. We have modeling, Indigenous knowledges, monitoring, and trying to integrate or weave all these different sources of knowledge together. And as we go through this whole process, how do Indigenous perspectives, including your perspectives on this call, and broader community input, and also the Native Advisory Council, how does that feed into the decisions that we make, into the analysis that we do and the questions that we ask? Another key role of the council will be to help us promote the protection of Indigenous knowledges throughout the project and develop protocols for to protect Indigenous knowledges. And this can include things like free, prior, and informed consent, and also helping us evaluate, what are the potential risks of people sharing their knowledge and making sure that we inform people working with us of those risks. It can involve things like data sharing agreements. So we'll be looking to the council to help us think through this and what it means for our project. In addition, as both Keith and Nicole mentioned, throughout the project and through calls like this, through those meetings that Nicole mentioned, like the Alaska Forum on the Environment and AtChem, and other ways, we'd like to get input from the broader community on different questions. Nicole mentioned, for example, what future scenarios should we look at? And then we hope that the Native Advisory Council will help us evaluate this input from the broader community and then make decisions about how to proceed. And we also, we want to make sure that all this information that we're producing, that it's relevant and that it's understandable and that it's usable by Indigenous communities. So that's another key role that the council will help us with. And that kind of relates to clear, widespread communication. What are the best ways for us to conduct outreach and, reach out to communities and organizations that might be interested in this project so that they can provide input into what would be helpful for them? How can we distribute project information and products? And also we hope that the council will help us review materials to make sure that, again, that they're understandable and relevant. And Nicole was mentioning this Arctic River Summit that right now is scheduled to be held in Anchorage during the winter of 2021-22. And we would like the Native Advisory Council to help, to lead the design of the summit and also help host the summit. And the summit was scheduled at this time because it's right before a number of key modeling decisions are going to be made. And so one potential aspect of the summit, if the council agrees, would be to help inform those decisions. And Nicole also mentioned that we'll be producing a paper, some kind of paper documenting the output from the summit, and all people who participate will be co-authors on that paper. So the council, for this year, with the first call scheduled in July, we'll be having an almost monthly call schedule. We'll have one break in August, and the calls will be 2 hours long. And then after December, so from January 2021 through July 2022, we'll switch to a call every 2 months. And then we also would ask that the council members answer emails and help review documents in between those calls. We'd also ask that the council members attend the Arctic River Summit, and transportation and lodging will be paid for that. And Serena, I think this is the question that you were asking, and if it's not, please feel free to ask another question. But there will be a consultation fee of $135 US, which is approximately 188 Canadian dollars per call. And it's for this first 2-year term. We haven't secured funding for the second term, but we're hoping to demonstrate through this first 2-year term that people are interested in participating on a council and how valuable the input is. And we're working to secure funds for the remainder of the project. And then another key point is that the council and project team will decide on a decision-making process during the first council meeting when we're establishing the bylaws. So we're having an open application process, as Nicole mentioned, and we hope that by having an open application process that everyone will feel welcome to apply if it's of interest to them. And we know that there are a lot of talented people and there's a lot of experience out there that we may not know of personally. So we hope that people spread the word about the Native Advisory Council and about the project. And if you know of people who might be interested in this, we welcome you to pass along our information, and we're happy to talk with people about this. So with this open application process, and again, we'll be sending out links to the application after the call. We'll be having a selection committee, and the selection committee will consist of a subset of the project team. And we're also asking 3 to 5 external reviewers to help us with this process. We're looking for members of Alaska Native tribes and First Nations or Indigenous organizations to be external reviewers to help us select who will be on the committee. We're hoping to have a committee that represents diverse geographic regions, diverse cultural groups, ages, genders, and experiences. Applicants will be notified of their selection status by mid-July. So there's a few different ways to apply. We have a Google form, and again, we'll send out the link. You can, we'll also be sending out a Microsoft Word document. So we welcome you to fill that out, and you can email it to me at arcticrivers@colorado.edu. You can also fax the Microsoft Word document to Sabre Duran, and here's the number. And we also have added an option if you'd like to mail in the form. We'll have an address to mail it to Etta Mutter with the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council. So there's a few different ways that you can get the form to us and apply. And again, those applications are due June 24th. And as both Keith and Nicole mentioned, this is the first in a series of webinars. We're hoping that these we'll be able to regularly update people about the project. And as Nicole mentioned, also get input into the project. Upcoming webinar topics will include the equitable co-production of knowledge and the protection of Indigenous knowledges. And we hope to, both have Indigenous speakers presenting on these topics, but also to get your feedback as to what you think is important with respect to these topics. We'd like to have a webinar where we discuss Indigenous planning perspectives. And then the first big modeling decision that needs to be made are what future scenarios to consider. And this decision needs to be made about a year from now, so next summer, in the summer of 2021. And so we'll also be presenting some information on, future scenarios and the pros and cons of different choices as we, we hope to get input from you and from the Native Advisory Council on what future scenarios we should be considering. And with that, again, we really thank you for your time, and we thank you for attending. And again, we recognize that this is a really large, steady region, and there are a lot of communities and organizations in this region. So we would definitely welcome you to, if you think people might be interested, please feel free to give them our contact information, or if you could email us their contact information, we can reach out to them. We'd like to have as broad community input into this project as possible. So thanks everyone. And if you email us at arcticrivers@colorado.edu, a few of us, myself and Nicole, Sabre, and Keith, we're monitoring this email, and we'll make sure that your question gets to the right person. And also feel free to call me. My number is 928-523-6758 if you have any questions. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Karen, for the information on the council. There were a few questions that came in during your presentation. One from Eric Alstrom. Will the council try to have individuals from each region, from the mouth of the Yukon to the headwaters?
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for that question. I guess we were really discussing we're not totally sure who's going to apply since it's an open application process. So we'll kind of see where the different people are from and try to make sure that they're distributed geographically. And if you have the opportunity to type in the question box, and what do you consider to be each region? That might be helpful for us to understand. So thank you for that question.
Okay, and thank you. Another one from Margaret Rudolph. Why not go directly through the tribal governments in the region to build a council instead of an open call?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Margaret. You know, we were considering these different processes, and we settled on an open call, I guess for a couple of different reasons. You know, one was by making it an open call, it would allow people who were really interested in the project to apply, to kind of people who were interested and enthusiastic to apply to be on the council. And we thought it would be a good way to get diverse perspectives that include both kind of the tribal government perspective, but also the perspectives of other non-governmental organizations as well. And we definitely welcome people from tribal governments to apply if they're interested. So I hope that answers that question. So thanks so much.
Great, thank you. And so I think we will continue to welcome any comments or questions. There were a few more questions, but I'd like to have Nicole and Keith come back on, and any of the panelists that would like to join us for just an open Q&A right now. We have one from Bonnie Murray. Will the internships be paid internships?
I can take that if that's all right. Yes, they, yeah, thank you for that question. They will be paid internships. We are hoping to work with the Alaska Native Science and Engineering Program in the USGS to fund a couple of internships that we'll host over the summer at the USGS. And then we have funding to host an additional internship with the Watershed Council.
Great. And we have another one from Paul to the staff. Why has pH and DO been dropped from the ION program? These WQ parameters are important metric for river health.
I can take that one too, unless I see Ed there as well. I'll say that I think that they have not been dropped from the ION program, but the specific conductance and the temperature sensors are specific to this Arctic Rivers project. So it's sort of two separate but very overlapping projects. But I'll let Ed speak to that also.
Oh,
Ed, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, maybe there's a little confusion with Indigenous Observation Network. We actually transferred with our meters and replaced the dissolved oxygen with conductivity meters, or going through that transition. And that was one reason is as our main focus was mostly on the mainstream of the Yukon River, as well as the mainstream of the major tributaries of the Yukon. And they are very well mixed. So what it means is where we measure that the water was always saturated with oxygen. So the reading we accumulated over the past years, or past 10 years since we started the network, was like not really helpful. So the dissolved oxygen content, like the dissolved oxygen within the water, the gas kind of trapped in the water, is very, very important parameters for fish habitat. But it becomes more significant when you have a water body who's maybe more shallow, like lakes or little creeks, streams, where you do not have that big mixing like we see in these major tributaries or the Yukon, where you have a fast flowing river, and it's very well mixed. So maybe that kind of helped.
Okay, great. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions at this moment, but I will give it a few more minutes. If anybody, again, has any questions or comments for the panelist presenters, feel free to do so in the questions box on your right-hand side. And I will turn it back to my presentation quickly and just go through a few more slides. Just wanted to let everybody know that this webinar is being recorded, and any approved presentations will be available via the ITEPS Tribes and Climate Change webinar archive site. And any contact, if you want any questions, direct them to Karen Cozzetto. And again, we have the email and her phone number listed here. Sorry, did I show I don't know if that showed up as a PowerPoint or not. Maybe I forgot to show my, show my screen.
Yeah, Colleen, I think your screen wasn't
Oh,
showing.
that's why.
Maybe.
People are probably wondering what is going on. Okay, can you see it now? Got it.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay,
Yeah.
here it is. There we go. We have the link here and Karen's information. So I will just leave that up for a little bit.
And this is Karen. I just wanted to mention that Arctic Rivers at colorado.edu, it's a general email, and so if you email that email, you'll be able to it'll be passed on along to whichever investigator might be the most appropriate to answer the question. So it's kind of a general email to reach us. So thank you.
Great. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, more just comments right now. Thank you for an informative seminar from Brent Ward. And just a few more comments. And if we did not get to your comments or questions, these will be recorded, and also you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to where the recording will be available, and also where the presentations will be available and any upcoming webinars in this series. And so with that, I don't know if any of the panelist presenters have anything else to share, but otherwise, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. To all our attendees and to our guest presenters, Karen Cozzetto, Keith Musselman, and Nicole Herman Mercer. And hope you all have a great rest of the day. And again, I don't know if anybody else has anything to add before we end this webinar.
This is Karen. I just wanted to thank all the attendees. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that you will join us as we on our journey through this project for the next couple of years. So thank you, everyone. And
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for your attention. And feel free to follow up with the emails if you have feedback, additional guidance. This is a new project, and it's an expansive project for many of us, and we're looking for feedback and looking to do the right thing.
Oh, it looks like we have one more question that came in from Melinda Chase. Did you have any Indigenous people helping to design this project?
No, we did not, aside from our interactions with the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council. And again, their board of directors, as well as representatives that meet at their biannual meetings, identify research questions that is agreed upon by the 74 tribes and First Nations that they represent. So that is that was the engagement. And besides that, we had engagement with ITEP, and we have a couple of our investigators with ITEP are Indigenous.
Yeah, and I would just add, in addition to that, I think Etta and I both probably more informally than formally spoke with Indigenous community members that we work with a lot in the region to ensure that the project was something that would be of interest and meaningful to their communities. So there wasn't direct participation in the project or proposal writing process, but there was a lot of, I think, indirect guidance. So.
And maybe I can pitch in too that the project idea development that actually in 2017 through our biannual summit resolution was passed, and the process is like that tribes and First Nations with concerns kind of formulating this resolution that will be discussed within the meeting kind of round table and be voted on. So it is kind of rooted, actually, I would say, within the Indigenous kind of community stakeholders that were participating at that summit, and as well the concerns about water temperature, travel on the river through sea ice sickness lost over the years has been addressed by many tribes during our summit meeting in 2019 in Fairbanks. So kind of, let's say, it was not directly with Indigenous person involved directly in the writing the project, but the ideas kind of originated, I think, within the Indigenous community.
Okay, great, thank you. Melinda says, thank you for the clarification on the research question being asked coming from the Alaska Native Indigenous people. That was the group I was referring to, our Arctic Indigenous people participating in the designing of the project and evaluation. So with that, I think we will close it out. And again, I hope you all have a great day. Thank you for attending and hope you have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.